Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me for another Experiences Living Abroad. I'm here with the beautiful Cecile. Hello, how are you, Cecile?
Hi, I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Now, Cecile, tell our viewers, where are you from
I'm from Toronto, Canada.
and where are you currently living?
I'm currently in the south of Turkey in a city called Adana.
Okay, and tell us, how are your story? How'd you get from Canada to Turkey?
So, in 2006, I literally upturned my life, went to Turkey for about 3 months, and just basically stayed.
Okay.
So, I spent 4 years in the city I'm in now,
Mhm.
which is a Mediterranean city. We're about 30 kilometers north of the Mediterranean coast. And after 4 years here, I moved to Istanbul, and we were there for 7 years.
Mhm.
And only recently, 3 years ago, we came back here to Adana.
Okay. And when you say we, you're including your family, which includes. Mhm.
So my husband is Turkish. He's from this city, Adana, and we have three Turkish Canadian sons.
That's beautiful. So, talk about your leaving Canada. Like, what prompted you to go, and how did that all work?
Mhm. Well, I worked as a language teacher at an ESL school. That was one of my jobs. I had a few different teaching jobs, and there were a lot of Turkish students at that school. So I had a bit of an introduction to the culture. But other than that, I knew nothing about Turkey. I don't think I could have found it on a map. Um, so that's kind of one part of the story. Um, Years before that, as an undergrad at the University of Toronto, I had taken Art History 101. And somewhere in the pages of my huge Janssen History of Art book, which anyone who's taken art history will probably know, there was a tiny little photo, two actually, of the interior of the Hagia Sophia, or in Turkish as it's called the Hagia Sophia. And I was just mesmerized. And I just sort of, on that moment, I sort of said, before I die, I have to see this building. And then I forgot about it.
Mhm.
So fast forward 2006, I just said, actually, no, 2005, I took a visit to Turkey. I wanted to travel, and I wanted to travel alone. So I went to Turkey. And on that trip, I saw the Hagia Sophia. And that just sort of began the beginning of my love of this country.
Mhm.
When I moved here in 2006, I had a return ticket for 3 or 4 months later.
Okay.
I moved here in August, and I went home for Christmas. And I didn't know if I would just go back to Toronto and pick up try to get my old jobs back, pick up where I'd left off. But I just decided to stay. I mean, life in Turkey those first few months had been simple. I mean, the cost of living here was inexpensive. I got some jobs teaching English, and I just, I'd started to learn the language a little bit. And I just thought, 4 months is nothing. Maybe I'll make it a year. And then a year later, I got a really good job, like meaning not just part-time, like salaried with benefits.
Mhm.
And that was a 2-year contract. So suddenly 4 months became a year, became 3 years.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so in some ways, I got to have the career here that I'd decided I wanted in Toronto, but
Mhm.
hadn't somehow be able to quite realize yet.
Mhm. And so, when you decided to go initially, did you go on a tourist visa and then transition into a work visa?
I went on a tourist visa, and I just extended it by leaving the country every few months. And
Okay.
then and then I was working part-time at a language school, and they kindly agreed to start all the paperwork for hiring me, but they'd never done it before. And I'm sure other people in other countries can relate. There's mixed information. And again, this was 14 years ago. Things are better now, but it was hard to find consistent information.
Mhm.
And then while we were in the middle of that process, I got this other contract, and they were very experienced hiring foreigners. They do a lot of foreign teacher contracts. So then everything was set, living, like residence permit, work visa, accommodations, everything.
And is that what you currently do now? Are you a teacher currently?
I am a teacher, but no longer at a K-12 school. So I taught in two different high schools over 10 years. And for the past year, this is now going to be my second year, I'm teaching at a university.
So just going back really quickly, when you found your teaching job in Turkey, like how did you go through the process of finding your job?
So the first sort of big, professional job I found, I contacted the school. I had actually contacted the school before I moved to Turkey just to sort of explore my options. And I had, been emailing with the head of that school. And when I first arrived in Turkey, I met with him. But of course, hiring season for these schools tends to start in December, January, and be wrapped up by March, April. Typically, the better the school, the earlier their hiring is done. And so the following, when I first arrived, there were no jobs there, but I had that contact. And then, in preparation, when I decided to stay, or as I started to think about staying, I got that job just by speaking directly with the director. The second job I got, so after 3 years of teaching in Tarsus, we moved to Istanbul. So I got the Istanbul job. I had met a colleague, another Canadian, at some kind of a conference or something within Turkey. And we just kept in touch. And I asked, are there any openings at your school? I think I'd asked the year prior, there weren't. I asked the following year, he said there are. And again, I just emailed the head. Typically, these schools on their website will have an HR page and they'll tell you what they want. Both schools that I worked at over that decade tend to hire through hiring fairs, international fairs. So London or Boston or Toronto, for example. But since I was already in the country, I think it was a win-win situation. So hiring process, typically you send your CV, you do an initial interview, you do a second or third interview with maybe, academic dean, head of department, that kind of thing.
Awesome. And so you left the country by yourself, solo travel, and found a little love and started a family. Talk about that.
Well, it's so long ago now. It was definitely, there was a part of it was that I was 30 years old and I was sort of at a point in my life where I said, okay, I've heard all the warnings about Turkish men stealing your heart and being great. They're very good at wooing you. And so I knew all that, but I also said, okay, this guy seems like a good guy, and he is 14 years later. But I also said, I'm not 20, I'm 30. I'm not, I don't know, I just felt like it was a time of my life where living in Canada, I had planned everything out and thought I was on this path to my, I don't know, let's just say white picket fence, minivan and Labrador retriever, or whatever your picture of adultness was. And after that, I just wanted to try something different. And I remember very consciously saying to myself, if I don't try this, I'll always wonder what if. And the worst that's going to happen is I'm going to fall flat on my face and just pick up and try again. So it was a very conscious, I'm not going to go into this starry-eyed. And I had my own money. I had a job. I started to make my own friendships, and so that really helped. I was, and I was already learning the language. So that just really helped me feel like I was in a position of equal footing. Obviously I could never be those early years, but I feel it was a good balance of blind love, but also good common sense. If you've ever met people from Turkey, they tend to be extremely hospitable, very friendly, very warm, very extroverted, but especially from the Mediterranean regions, I mean, everyone you meet wants you to come to their home. They want to feed you. And I always found it really easy to get to know people here, students from my school, as well as people I met after I came here. So just
Awesome.
time happened.
So,
Yeah.
so talk about a little bit of raising a family in a country you're new to. So did you find that because your husband is from here, he kind of help you navigate, or, just wing it like parenthood typically is?
So my first son was born after I'd been here, I want to say 3.5, 4 years. And so by that time, I mean, I had very early on said, if I'm going to try and stay in this country and raise a family in this country, I want to learn the language. Growing up in Toronto, where there are a lot of immigrants, you would see families where the parents had never learned English and the kids were always translating for the parents. And I just had in my mind, like, that was not the way I wanted to be. So by the time I had my first child, I already had very passable Turkish. So the language was less of an issue. Plus, when you do things like have a baby, suddenly you learn a lot of new vocabulary, specific vocabulary. So, no, I don't think, bureaucratic things, yes. My husband is still to this day a great guide. I get kind of like very nervous automatically, like panicky, if I have to do anything, bureaucratic. I find it very complicated, and maybe it's like that in Canada too, and I just don't realize it. So he still helps me. But other than, how to check into a hospital, this was all new to him too. But we had our first child in a very small town to the west of Adana, in a historical town called Tarsus. It's actually a city, but it's a small city. People might have heard of St. Paul of Tarsus. And it was such a small place that also in some ways helped. The hospitals were not crowded. The school I worked for had a doctor who spoke perfect English. So there was always someone to help navigate that. And my in-laws were around, so that was a help, and I had friends and colleagues. So in retrospect, I can see that it was probably like hard and everything, but at the time I was just, one step at a time doing it. And
And how do you think moving abroad has changed your perspective on life?
Well, specifically having moved to Turkey, I can say has changed my perspective because I think I've loosened up just in terms of like, I no longer have as sort of tight a grip, or like trying to have a grip and control everything. I think growing up in North America, in an eastern city or a northeastern city, there's that culture of progress and productivity and efficiency and planning out the next 60 years of your life. And here there's a very Mediterranean culture, but there's also a little bit of a Middle Eastern culture, which I only realized much, much later. So I think those have rubbed off on me in terms of I no longer schedule things as far in advance because you can't. I'm no longer quite as, like regimented my daily schedule, like little things like that. I like to think I've become a bit more easygoing. I think that hospitality that I mentioned early on has rubbed off on me. I think I've learned to be less self-centered and be more focused on what can I do for the people around me. Maybe that's age, but I think that's also a bit of the Turkish culture, just that warmth and generosity. Yeah, cooking for people. And
I find that is often the case when going to other countries, period. It just seems like this hospitality of inviting people into your home and getting to know them and developing these relationships are just so, so important. And I know that was the part that I really enjoy about Portugal as well. Yeah. So what advice would you give for those individuals who are considering moving abroad, but maybe just haven't made that jump yet?
So, I mean, definitely be open and flexible to things changing. Because like I said, I came thinking I'd stay 3 or 4 months, and that completely changed. And then along that theme of being open, like I had been really trying to transition from working in Toronto, working one-on-one with kids who had learning exceptionalities and teaching in an ESL classroom. I'd really been trying to transition into a K-12 school, or like a K-8 school. And it just, I mean, I hadn't been trying for that long, let's say maybe a year, but it wasn't happening. And once I came here, I was able to make that happen. And I mean, that's a very specific example, but just, I don't think I had imagined that my career could take off the way it did. Mm-hmm. And actually, I'm hesitant to use the word manifest, but I mean, in some ways, things that I had wanted but hadn't really like consciously been working towards suddenly just appeared for me here. Mm-hmm. Definitely try to interact with locals. Mm-hmm. Would be another piece of advice. I mean, that's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea, but it definitely can enrich the experience. The people I've met here, the foreigners I've met here over the years who are the happiest are the ones who have a lot of Turkish friends, mm-hmm. And don't stay in a kind of expat bubble, let's say. Mm-hmm. People who do learn the language, people who can, you know, turn off their own cultural you know, everything, even if it's just for a few hours. So an example is I really like to go to bed early. I like to get up early, and Turkish people generally have a later schedule. They'll eat quite late, and then at a very late hour, they'll go visiting and have coffee or tea and cakes and other sweets. And, you know, at the beginning, I was flexible, open to everything. And then there was a period where I was like, well, no, I live here now. You know, back to the real world. I can't be doing this. Mm-hmm. And then over time, I learned to be less rigid and just sort of, you know, that doesn't happen all the time. So just roll with it when it comes. And I think that's another piece of advice maybe for someone longer term. Try to find a balance between, so in my case, when am I Canadian Cecile and when am I Cecile who lives in Turkey?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Cecile, I want to thank you so much for speaking with us today and dropping your insight. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Nice meeting you too, Cinnamon.
Great. So again, folks, Experiences Abroad, we appreciate you so much. We know you can spend your time anywhere, and we're so glad you did it with us. Till next time.